There's a lot of talk these days about the deep state. What most people don't realize is that deep state had its origin in the so-called Civil War and Republican Reconstruction. The deep state, indeed, and its abuse of the Constitution really had its early beginnings and is a common problem today because of Reconstruction, something that most people do not realize and very few scholars, if any, will even discuss. I'm Ron Kennedy. My most recent book, Reconstruction, Destroying the Republic and Creating an Empire, is explains how the war and Reconstruction set the stage for today's deep state. History as taught and enforced by the Northern victor in the War for Southern Independence claims that post-war, the South organized an active campaign against newly freed slaves. A campaign they claim that was based on harsh racial hatred. But is this true? After all, empires write and enforce their justification for invading, conquering, and occupying formerly free people. Reconstruction, Destroying the Republic and Creating an Empire is a book different from any other book ever written about Reconstruction. It begins not in the year after the close of the so-called Civil War, but in 1787, at the beginning of America's legitimate, constitutionally limited Republic of Sovereign States. Today, postmodern neo-Marxist historians claim that former Confederates were hostile to Black civil rights. But is that slanderous allegation supported by the facts? And what do these two Southerners have in common? Senator Hiram Revels of Mississippi, the first Black U.S. Senator, and Confederate General P.G.T. Beauregard of Louisiana. Both are men, both are Southerners. Did they hate each other due to race and or antagonistic political ideas? Both post-war Southerners were advocates for civil rights for the newly freed slaves. Beauregard was but one of numerous other white Southerners who supported civil rights for the newly freed slaves. General Nathan Bedford Forrest, the most maligned Confederate general of all, was among those who supported civil rights for Black Southerners, including, of course, the right to vote. In 1866, thereabouts, after the end of the war, General Beauregard declared, quote, "The Negro was Southern born, with a little education and some property qualifications, he can be made to take sufficient interest in the affairs and prosperity of the South to ensure an intelligent vote." Dr. T. Harry Williams, a modern era liberal historian, noted of General Beauregard that in Negro suffrage, he, that is Beauregard, saw an element of strength for the South. Republicans who controlled Congress were actively using the technique of divide and rule to assure Republican control of the South and thereby controlling the South senators and representatives, which would allow the Republican Party to control the federal government. Their aim was to pit Black Southerners against white Southerners, create an atmosphere of racial hatred against white Southerners, disfranchise former supporters of the Confederacy, and use mostly illiterate freed slaves as a loyal Republican voting bloc. This led to the establishment of corrupt and criminal state and local governments across the South. It became so bad that many Black Southerners joined with white conservatives to oust scallywag and carpetbag governments. In a letter to President Grant in 1875, Senator Revels declared at the last election, men, irrespective of race, color, or party affiliation, united and voted together against men known to be incompetent and dishonest. Now, what did the returning Confederate veterans find when they came back home after the war? Confederate veterans returned to a devastated land. No democratically organized state and local government. Lawlessness abounded. No civil courts or means to enforce what laws existed. Federal troops and Northern carpetbaggers viewed the conquered South as spoils of war, free for the taking. Anyone who had supported the Confederacy was denied the right to vote, and mostly illiterate former slaves were given the right to vote. This resulted in the creation of some of the most fraudulent and corrupt state governments ever to be inflicted upon American citizens. The resulting bayonet state and local governments enacted confiscatory taxation. It was forced taxation without representation. Remember, the main reason the colonies seceded from Great Britain in 1777 was because of taxation without representation. Now, South Carolina, as an example of the South, did not pay off its Reconstruction debt until almost a century after the close of the war. And South Carolina's example is not unique to the other southern states. This book, with over 1,200 footnotes, documents the hidden fact that Reconstruction was not a time of rebuilding a devastated and impoverished South. During active Reconstruction, 1866 to 1877, the federal government, controlled by the Republican Party, used its military, federal agents, and the Union League to unleash violence and terror against the white South. The federal government, through its agents, especially the Union League and undisciplined black militias, drew first blood. They initiated a campaign of violence. Barn burnings, church burnings, and physical violence against whites became the primary tool used to intimidate and control the formerly free, self-governing whites of the South. During passive Reconstruction, 1877 to 1965, while the North was enjoying an age of prosperity, the Gilded Age, the age of robber barons, over 6 million Southerners were impoverished and forced into a new system of slavery referred to as sharecropping. 60% of the South's impoverished sharecroppers were white. So the so-called Civil War did not end slavery. It merely morphed it into a system worse than slavery itself. Now, what was the goal of Reconstruction? Well, Representative Thaddeus Stevens, Republicans of Pennsylvania, he made it very clear. He was a leader of the Republicans in the House, and this is what he said the North intended to do with the South, its newly conquered territory. Our generals have a sword in one hand and shackles in the other. The South must be punished under the rules of war, its land confiscated. These offending states were out of the Union and in the role of a belligerent nation to be dealt with by the laws of war and conquest. James S. Allen, a Marxist historian and member of the Communist Party USA, had this to say about Reconstruction. He said, Reconstruction was the continuation of the Civil War into a new phase in which the revolution passed from the stage of armed conflict into primarily a political struggle which sought to consolidate the Northern triumph. Henry J. Abraham, a liberal constitutional scholar of the modern era, had this to say about Reconstruction and the amendments, the 14th and 15th Amendments that were never legally ratified these. They are illegitimate amendments. They were pinned to the Constitution, not in a constitutional manner, but with bloody bayonets. But this is what this scholar said, liberal scholar said. He said these constitutional amendments that were consolidation dated the North's victory. So they were the amendments that really made the final phase of the war complete, the final completion of Northern victory. Albion W. Torgey, a former Union Army officer and a carpetbagger from North Carolina, was clear about the goal of Republican Reconstruction. He admitted that post-war, the USA was one nation in name only. He noted that the North and the South were two hostile ideas. And notice, two hostile ideas. The South believing in a limited, constitutionally limited federal government controlled by sovereign states, whereas the North believed in a centralized, all-powerful, indivisible federal government controlled by Northern elites. He wrote that they intended to make the USA a free country according to Northern notions. He also noted that Reconstruction was demanded by Republican politicians to do what? To assure party ascendancy. Reconstruction, destroying the Republic and creating an empire, is different than any other book written about Reconstruction. In its 550 pages and over 1,200 footnotes, I document the South's 5 strategic failures that made Reconstruction possible, its continuation today, and what must be done to restore America's legitimate, constitutionally limited republic of sovereign states. I divide Reconstruction into 3 phases: active Reconstruction, passive Reconstruction, and beginning in 1965, modern era Reconstruction. The book is available from online bookstores or from the author's website, www.kennedytwins.com. Thank you for listening. Thank you. And I hope you have a chance to pick this book up and give it a read.